I'm going to be reviewing the new Niner RLT9. When I say new, Niner doesn't really do model years, but when they find a change is due, they make it. And so they've recently made a change in the fact that they have included a through axle, both front and rear, on both the aluminum and the steel version. So the rear is a 142 by 12 and the front is a 15 millimeter, which I'll show when I go over the bike. So this is the aluminum one. You can also get this in steel, and I'll say right off the bat, that was a very difficult decision for me to make. I've owned several steel bikes over the years and I love them, but I consulted with a guy at Niner, and he advised me, as a racer who likes a stiff bike and is going to maybe be doing some competition stuff on this bike, that the aluminum is probably going to be the better way to go. And he recommends tuning the ride with the tire. So in other words, if you want a more plush ride, get a little bigger tire. If you want a really fast and stiff ride, you can go with a little bit more narrow tire. And I'll show you the tires that I ended up putting on this bike when I go over it. Now this bike replaces my road bike. I recently made the decision that I was going to give up road riding for a few reasons. Safety was one. Also, I just find riding on dirt much more exciting. So I'm now focusing on gravel grinding, cyclocross, and mountain biking. So this bike is the one that I use for my longer dirt road rides, and when I start doing the gravel grinder competitions or events, I will be most likely using this bike. So this one is a gravel grinder. Now, that's a kind of a term that people are throwing out today. Some people call them B-road bikes, some people call them dirt road bikes, some people call them cyclocross bikes. So there's a little bit of a difference between a gravel grinder and a cyclocross bike. Do you need both? That's what I'm going to be finding out over the next few months when I ride this bike and my cyclocross bike. And I'm actually going to make some more videos, some more reviews on this bike, but I'm going to make a separate one that compares cyclocross bikes to gravel grinder bikes. And the difference is, do you need both? Which one would you buy depending on what type of riding that you do? So stay tuned to my channel because I'm really excited about putting that one out. But the differences between this and a pure cyclocross bike, there's a few of them. One is the angles are a little bit slacker. So the head angle is about a ½ degree slacker. The bottom bracket is a little bit lower. I measured it about 1.5 centimeters lower than my cyclocross race bike. It's also got a longer wheelbase, and it's got a little bit longer chainstay. So the reason that you'd want that is, on a gravel grinder, you're not doing cyclocross type racing where you're really darting in and out of turns. The cyclocross courses have some really sharp turns. You don't necessarily need to do that on a gravel grinder bike. A gravel grinder is one that's made for more long type rides where you're just going steady. You're going, it could be in the mountains, could be on flatter roads, but it's more of a steady type riding than just the fast acceleration and braking and quick cornering that you want on a cyclocross bike. So those little differences in the geometry of the bike actually do make a difference in the way the bike handles. And I know a ½ degree slacker head angle doesn't sound like much, but it does slow down the steering. And so a gravel grinder, you want a bike that's really stable. You want a bike that when you're going down a mountain road, dirt road at 30 miles an hour, you don't want a bike that's really twitchy. So again, I'm going to really go into what I feel that the differences are after riding the bikes. And again, I'll let you guys know if I think having two of these is justified. Now, the reason that I really wanted to go with this bike, one, is because I'm starting to do a lot more gravel grinding type riding and events and stuff like that. But I've been riding on dirt roads for years with my cyclocross bike. But when I'm in cyclocross race season, I wanted a bike that's set up, and again, I'll show you this, but I've got this set up with my seat pouch, got my mirror on it. I'm going to be getting some wider tires on it. I have my power meter on it. And so I wanted a bike that's, also got 2 water bottle cages. I only have one on my cyclocross bike. But I wanted a bike that was set up for dirt road riding, so I didn't have to change things out in the middle of cyclocross season when I wanted to go do long dirt road rides and set up a bike for riding on dirt roads. So this bike is totally set up to go hit the dirt roads. My cross bike now is just totally set up to go to the races on the weekends. And so that was probably the main reason, because I'll just say right off the bat that the differences between a cyclocross and gravel grinder bike are more subtle than, for instance, a trail bike and a cross-country bike. So a trail mountain bike and a cross-country mountain bike. Those two feel a lot different when you hop on them back to back. Again, the differences on a cross and gravel bike are a little bit more subtle, but like I said, having the two bikes set up for two different purposes is really nice. So this one is the green and yellow, and there's two paint schemes for the aluminum when they made the change to the through axle. The green and yellow, and they've got one that's white with a little bit of gray and orange. I think the green one suited me better. It just, you know, gravel grinding is kind of organic to me. I don't mean to get too philosophical, but I thought the green was kind of cool in that aspect. Plus, I hate to admit it, but it's a little bit easier to keep clean than the white. At least my last bike was white and it was hard to keep clean. So now that we got that out of the way, let me show you the bike. So, like I said, through axle, front and rear. It comes with the RockShox. It's got a Niner brand, but it's very similar to the RockShox Maxwell, if you're familiar with that. And again, on the front, it's got the Niner stamping on it, but it works just like a RockShox Maxwell. So whether or not they got that from RockShox, I'm not sure. So this is the 4-star build, which is Shimano Ultegra Hydro. So it's mechanical shifting, but hydraulic brakes. And while I'm mentioning the brakes, let me say right off the bat that I actually prefer the way these work over the Di2 hydraulic. So my cross bike is Di2 hydraulic Ultegra, and these engage quicker. And I know some people have made some complaints about the Di2. You get used to it. It's not a big deal, but you do have to keep your fingers up a little bit higher on the Di2 because the levers can hit your fingers. These will actually engage a little bit quicker than the Di2 Hydro. So just wanted to mention that. Now, for some reason, when I built this bike up, I had a hard time bleeding these brakes. Actually, not bleeding them, but centering them. So centering the pads. Usually what I do is I loosen the bolts on the caliper and squeeze the brake levers and then tighten the bolts, and they're centered. I have a little tool made by Hayes that I actually had to break out and use because I just couldn't center them normally. So a little bit of an issue. What's interesting about these brakes too is they've changed that they no longer have the bleed nipple at the top. So my Ultegra Di2 on my cross bike has a bleed nipple at the top. This one is at the bottom. And so when I bled the brakes, I didn't have a tube that fit that, so it just kind of dripped out the bottom. I use the gravity method when I bleed. You can use a syringe and inject from the caliper. I go and just go from the lever and drip it down through the lines, and it works great. So that's the brakes. Before I forget, let me mention weight. I weighed this frame before I built it up with just the seat post collar, and it weighed 3.8 pounds. I do not remember if I had the rear axle in there. I don't think I did. But really, before the headset, bottom bracket, and everything, the frame alone was 3.8. This whole bike with pedals and without the pump and the seat bag and the mirror and all that, so with the pedals, comes in at 21.4 pounds. That's about a pound heavier than my carbon cross bike. But you know, gravel grinder, you're not quite as concerned about weight because a lot of people use gravel grinders for multi-day events where they've got racks and bags, saddle bags. And while I'm mentioning that, you know, if you're thinking about getting one of these, and I mentioned aluminum and steel, the guy who worked at Niner also recommended that if you're doing multi-day events, the steel is probably the way to go because of the comfort. Because riding gravel roads day after day after day, that little bit of extra comfort that steel gives you will probably be a little bit better on your body. Now, both the aluminum and the steel have braze-ons for racks and fenders. So you've got these little holes back here that you can put a rack on. You can put a fender on this bike. It's got the holes on the fork, and you can you know, again, put a front rack on here. It's got the holes of the, you know, here for a fender. Same thing for the rear. So this is a really, really versatile bike. Again, you can use it for bike touring, you could use it for commuting, you can use it like I do just as a training bike for long dirt road rides, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hour dirt road rides. Now I did mention that I have a power meter, so I already had an Ultegra power meter on my road bike. That's also one of the reasons I went with Ultegra, because I already had the power meter, the Stages power meter. So you know, since I use this for training and intervals, I wanted to be able to use power, and I use a Garmin when I do that. This bike is a 53 centimeter. I typically ride a 54 centimeter road bike. My cross bike is also a 53, maybe a 52.5. But this is a good size. The next size up was a 56. That's too big. The next size down was a 50. So this 50 fits me really well. It's got a 54.5 inch top tube. And you can go on Niner's website and look at the measurements for geometries and all that. But I'm 5'8.5". So a little under 5'9", a little over 5'8", however you want to look at it. And this bike fits me really, really well. You can see I don't have a lot of seat posts sticking out. And the top tube slants a little bit. My cross bike, the top tube is really straight to get your shoulder underneath it for shouldering the bike. So you can definitely be taller and fit a 53. You don't want a top tube quite as long as a road bike. So I'm not as stretched out on this bike that I was on my road bike. Which is good because it's actually got the exact same top tube as my giant cyclocross bike. And that's a good thing because when I'm training, I don't want a bike that feels a lot different. I don't want to be stretched out more because, believe it or not, you do use a little bit different muscles when you're leaned over more than when you're a little bit more upright. And while I'm mentioning that, another advantage of a gravel grinder is typically the head tube is going to be longer, and so that it is on this one. It's a little bit taller, so I sit up just a tiny bit more. I'm not stretched out any less or more than my cyclocross bike, but I do sit up a little bit, which is something that you really want on a bike that's made for grinding over bumpy gravel roads for a long period of time. You can see I have 3 spacers underneath and 2 on top. That's what I like to use. This comes with a 90 millimeter stem. Which is exactly what I would spec on a bike like this. I've got a 90 on my cross bike. So I had mentioned that I built up this bike. I have a relationship with my shop. Since I'm partially sponsored by them, they let me build up my bikes. They trust my mechanic skills. So I will say that the cable routing on this bike is spot on. I've had some Niner bikes in the past that have had less than pleasurable cable routing. This one is great. So it's got these plugs. If I were to remove this plug, you would have a little bit of a slot here that's really easy just to drop the cable in. They come out the bottom very easily. All you do is there's a little plastic chuck that you put in after you put the cables through, and then just screws into the bottom with one screw. And very, very easy to route these cables. The rear derailleur cable is external after it comes out of the bottom bracket. I'm pretty sure you could drop these cables through even after the bottom bracket's installed. That slot underneath is very wide, and the cables just popped right out, no fishing them through and all that. The rear brake is external the whole way, which I like because it's kind of a pain to have to cut a hydraulic cable to get it through a frame. So that's totally external. Now I will say that these plugs were a bear to get in. I wish they were easier. In fact, this one's probably not even all the way in there. It took a little screwdriver just to push them down into that slot. But once they're in, they're in. I mean, it really protects the frame and keeps water from getting inside the frame. But they were a little hard to get in. So let's go over the components on the bike. The saddle is a Niner saddle, and it's a pretty comfortable saddle. Saddles are interesting. Some saddles, you sit on them and they feel uncomfortable when you first sit on them, and then they get more comfortable as you ride them. That's the way this saddle felt to me. Then you've got saddles that feel really nice when you first sit on them, but they're a little bit too wide and they get uncomfortable the more you ride them. It's kind of narrow, but it does have a cutout, anatomical protection cutout. But again, I'm pleased with the saddle. It's a really nice leather material. It seems durable but yet comfortable. The seat post is a carbon seat post. I don't think it's the RDO carbon, so it doesn't have that flex that the RDO post has. That would have been nice. I had one of those on one of my mountain bikes and loved it. But since I don't have a lot of seat posts sticking out, a flexible one maybe wouldn't have been as effective. On a mountain bike, you've got a top tube that slants more, so the longer the seat post sticks out, the more it can flex. So that RDO seat post that Niner makes is really nice. Like I said, 90 millimeter stem. This is alloy, as is the handlebar. I will say I think the handlebar tape could be a tad thicker. You know, it's a gravel grinder bike. You want a lot of comfort. It's nice and plush up here. You know, you've got the cables underneath, and it's a little bit more plush. But down here, it's a little thin. When I redo this tape, I'll probably get some that's a little bit thicker than the one that came on it. So you know, I mentioned the Ultegra shifters. This does have a 46-36. So the big chain ring is a 46. The smaller one is a 36. You know, this is pretty good for gravel grinding. I've been riding this bike for about a week. That's why it has a nice little coating of dust on it. And the gearing is good. I haven't had an issue with having it not be enough gearing. A 46 is plenty. The back is, it's got an 11-speed cassette in the back. It's actually a 105 cassette. The chain and the cassette are 105. Everything else is Ultegra. The cassette in the back is an 1132. I would not go wider than that, because if you go too wide on the cassette, you start to have to skip gears. And it's not like a mountain bike. You know, mountain bike, you can have some spacing between gears, so you jump up 2 or 3. But on a road or gravel grinder type bike where you're just kind of more steady pedaling, you want to find that perfect gear. You know, it's got plenty of gearing, and you know, for riding in the mountains with a 36 and a 32. If you ride some really steep stuff, you may want to go a little bit bigger, but for me, this is going to be fine. And you know, I've mentioned why I have 2 bikes. Another reason that I didn't mention in the beginning is because my cyclocross bike is actually just 1 chain ring in the front, so I don't have a really low gearing. This bike is going to be used more up in the mountains when I ride dirt roads up there. So you know, gearing should be good for that. The rear derailleur and front derailleur, of course, are Ultegra, and just super smooth, super crisp shifting. Actually, I haven't even taken the plastic off. Look at that, still have the plastic on the rear derailleur, protective plastic. So really smooth, crisp shifting. I mean, Shimano has just perfected mechanical shifting. I like my Di2 a lot. If you've seen my other videos, I did have a Di2 bike. It was actually a Niner BSB9 audio. Love the BSB9, awesome bike, but I didn't like the Di2 on that bike. I won't go into that story, but anyway, I'm back on Di2, giving it one more shot, but I had a problem with the battery failing. But anyway, this bike, you know, super smooth shifting, both front and rear, really crisp. So the Ultegra stuff is just, you know, it's awesome stuff. The rims are Stan's No Tube Grails, and super stoked that it came with these wheels. I've had these before on my other cross bike and just absolutely love these wheels. The nice thing about the Grails is that you can run tubeless road tires. You can run high pressure tires. You cannot do that with the Iron Cross wheels. You know, with the Grails, you can run cross tires, you can run tubeless road, you can run regular, you know, regular road tires. So nice and versatile. Now, I did change out the tires. That's the only component that I changed out. This bike comes with the Schwalbe G1 Evo tires. I think they're actually tubeless ready. I went with the Clements. These are a 33 by 700C. These actually measure out wider. These measure out to about a 35C. I do right now have tubes in them because I am actually going to go with a little bit bigger tire. I'm going to go with the Clement Explorer MSO tires. I'm going to get a 40C tire. You've got some pretty good tire clearance on this bike. Niner says that you can go to a 1.75 inch tire, which is about a 44, 45C tire. So I'm going to run a 40. I want this bike to be pretty plush. Some of our dirt roads that we ride, they're lime rock, and lime rock can be really smooth, or if it gets pitted in potholes, it can be super bumpy. We've got sand, we've got washboards. So I'm going to go with a little bit wider tire. It's what a lot of guys around here are running for gravel grinder events. And so again, the Clement Explorer MSOs, and when I do my follow-up review, I'll show those and I will talk about how they feel. So I left the tubes in since I really just didn't want to set these up tubeless yet because I'm going to be switching out the tires. Let me mention a few more things. I've already talked about the brakes, but let me just say that this comes with a 160 rotor. My cyclocross race bike comes with a 140. With a gravel grinder, your speeds are usually higher. On a cyclocross course, you may reach 20 miles an hour. On a gravel grinder, you could go 30 plus. So having the bigger rotor is nice. Also, on a gravel grinder type bike, you're braking for longer periods of time. So on a cross bike, you may have a quick hard brake and then you're off the brakes. If you're coming down, you might descend 2,000-3,000 feet in a gravel grinder event in one shot. So having the bigger rotor dissipates heat and it gives more power. So a perfect spec for this bike. Good job, Niner, on that. The fork is a full carbon fork. So it's got carbon lowers, and the steer tube is also carbon. So that adds to the comfort of this bike. I mentioned that it comes with little holes here for racks or fenders or whatever. They came with these plugs in, and actually they either fell out in the box or whatever, but I'm missing a couple of them, as you can see. I called Niner and asked them if they could send me a couple, and they said they don't have any. So I guess they just get that from wherever the bike's made. So I kind of wish I could get some more plugs, but we'll see. The bottom bracket uses these press fit adapters. So the shell is designed to be a press fit, and then you press in the adapters, and then you use threaded bottom bracket cups. So it gives you some versatility. So excuse me, you could in theory set this bike up as a single speed and use Niner's eccentric bottom bracket, and that would allow you to do the chain tension for a single speed. So again, the bike is so versatile. There's a lot of things you can do with this frame. And while I'm mentioning the frame, you can get this as a frame only. I think it's $1,000, $1,050 for the frame only. The steel's a little bit more, but you can get this as a frame and do a lot with it. Now let me talk about the ride quality of the bike, and I'm not going to go too deep into it because I've only been riding this bike a week. I wanted this to be kind of an initial review of the bike, showing you the bike up close and all that, but I will say that the bike is just as it's supposed to be. It's a comfortable bike. This aluminum, my first road bike way back in college was aluminum, and it was the harshest thing that you could ever ride. It made a smooth road feel like an off-road trail, and so aluminum has come a long way, and this aluminum is, it is stiff, so when you sprint or whatever, or get out of the saddle and climb, it's going to be stiff and not flex much. So all that power is going to go right to the wheel, but it's also comfortable. Now, like I said, I am going to get some bigger tires and make the ride plush, but even with these tires, these 35C tires with tubes, it's still a comfortable bike. I wouldn't say the feel is a lot more comfortable in terms of absorbing chatter than my carbon bike. My carbon race bike, cross bike, is designed to be really stiff. Carbon can be built up to be really comfortable or really stiff. Mine is kind of in between. So this, I would say it feels pretty similar to the carbon in terms of, again, just absorbing the trail chatter and things like that. But it is a stiff ride for sprinting and things like that, and cornering. The through axle definitely helps with that. I'm not sure how much of a difference I'd have to ride the older model back to back to tell you if the through axle really helps, but I've noticed on my mountain bike when I made that conversion that it does help. So the geometry, you can feel the difference when going back and forth between a cyclocross race bike, and so this bike, compared to a cross bike, I don't want to go too much into it yet, but the cornering is more of a carving a corner, whereas a bike with steeper angles like a pure race bike, cyclocross race bike, is going to kind of slice, so it'll just dive right into a corner. This is a little bit more gradual when you go into a corner. Again, the differences aren't extremely noticeable if you're not used to really aggressive type riding, but someone like me who's been riding a while, I do notice the difference, especially the bottom bracket being lower. I think that makes the biggest difference in the ride quality. So you don't need a bottom bracket that's real high to get over things like you would on a cyclocross race bike, but I do notice that it just feels like the bike's a little bit more planted when I'm riding, and when I'm cornering, it feels a little bit more stable in the corners. But so overall, initial impressions after the first week of riding is that the bike rides just like it's advertised. It's a little bit more comfortable on longer stretches of road. It's not quite as snappy as my cross bike. So with the longer chain stays and longer wheelbase, it's not going to accelerate quite as quick. But this isn't a bike that you want to be, just accelerating real quick out of a turn and braking hard for the next one. This is just the nice steady type riding. So so far, again, after the first week, that's what it feels like, a nice ride to ride steady. I can hammer pretty hard on this bike and just hold a nice steady pace on a dirt road. So that's going to wrap it up for this review of the Niner RLT9. Again, I'm going to follow this up with a more long-term review like I do, and I'll talk even more about the ride characteristics of the bike. But also stay tuned again, like I said in the beginning, for a video that's going to compare, really go into depth between gravel grinder bikes and cross bikes and talk about the differences and which one is right for you. So thanks for watching.